Happy Easter. So glad that you are here with us. Thank you once again for being here today. Thank you for those joining us online. Man, we celebrate. Easter is something that we can celebrate every single day as a believer of Jesus. It's not something that just happens once a year. It's something that lives in our heart, that Christ is risen from the dead. And it should impact how we live our lives. But we get to celebrate it collectively, corporately, at this time each year. And it's so awesome to be able to celebrate Easter. But here's the thing. Nobody expected the story to end up like this. His followers didn't think so. We wouldn't think so either. We wouldn't have thought so either. We don't find anyone outside of Jesus' tomb counting down. We find Jesus' followers doing exactly what we would expect them to do. And we see them doing exactly what they thought they should be doing. They expected Jesus to do what deceased people do, and so nobody expected this. And on Easter morning, when a group of despondent women go to the tomb to re-embalm Jesus' body because two guys had embalmed him in the first time, and they didn't think that they did a good job. Like, we got to go and got to take care of this the right way. These women who had more faith than anyone, they were with Jesus. They watched him, they followed him. When other people scattered, they followed him. They watched him die like everyone else, and they expected him to stay dead. They believed he was a teacher. They believed he was a miracle worker from God. They had hoped he was the Messiah, but that seemed wrong. God would not have allowed the Messiah to be arrested and then crucified. That didn't make any sense to them, or so they thought. Nobody expected the story to end up like this. Nobody predicted it except Jesus himself. Not only did he talk about it metaphorically, and it seemed, and maybe even a bit cryptically to those who were following him throughout the years of his ministry, he actually outright declared who he was the week before his death. He declared it. And so we want to look a little bit at what happened prior to Jesus arriving in Jerusalem, prior to the events of Holy Week, prior to the Last Supper and the arrest and the crucifixion and, of course, the resurrection. Right before then, Jesus declared who he was. Now, Jesus had a best friend. His name was Lazarus, and he lived in this town called Bethany. And he had two sisters, Lazarus did, Mary and Martha. And Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus that Jesus' best friend Lazarus was sick and it wasn't looking good. And Jesus knows he only has a little bit of time left, not Lazarus, but he knows that Jesus himself only has a limited time left, that we are in the thick of this right now, and he's in the thick of his ministry. There was a time when Jesus was like doing miracles kind of quietly. He was like waiting to do them. I can't do them yet. My time has not yet come. He was teaching quietly, but this wasn't that time. He had attracted large crowds. He had taught them. He had done many amazing miracles. And so Mary and Martha's message when it came to Jesus to come, they don't just believe that he can heal their brother. They know that he can heal their brother. They've seen him heal other people. And why wouldn't he want to? I mean, his best friend after all. So when Jesus receives the word, he chooses instead to wait a couple days instead of rushing over to Bethany, which kind of makes his disciples wonder what he's thinking. He decides to wait. And I don't know, in fact, John 11, chapter 11, verse 6 says that Jesus stayed 2 more days before deciding to leave to go head over to Lazarus and his family. And at this point, he already knows that Lazarus is going to be dead before he arrives to town. And Jesus had a plan, but nobody knew about it. Nobody knew that he had a plan. And when Jesus arrives to town, you can imagine how Lazarus' sisters were feeling. Like if you had a friend, if you had a best friend and they needed your help and you could help them and everybody knew you could help them and you didn't respond, right away, you probably hear about it, right? They were pretty disappointed that Jesus waited so long. And at this point, Lazarus had been dead, and he'd been in the grave for a few days. 4 days almost at that point. When he's a couple days when he was actually leaving and going and arriving, he's been dead for 4 days. Not only did Jesus miss the time of his death, he missed the funeral, he missed the burial, he missed it all. And Jesus is coming to town, and he arrives outside of the town, and Martha goes out to the edge of town to meet Jesus. And that's where I want us to pick up the story in John chapter 11. John chapter 11, verse 20. Just kidding. Verse 17, I'll start there. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. But when Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Just real quick. I want you to notice that, like when this happened, like what happens in our lives. When we lose somebody that's dear to us, what happens? We have people that gather around us, that try to console us, that try to comfort us. They don't know what to say. Really, there's nothing really to say other than my sympathies, I'm so sorry for your loss. People are hovering around Martha and Mary, just consoling them. But they knew, like the only one that could bring them ultimate comfort and peace was the person who was about to come to town. So even though they were surrounded by all these people who were consoling them, when they heard that Jesus was coming, Martha goes out to meet him. Mary stays in the house. Martha says to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask." She's saying, "Hey, man, where were you? How? Like it shouldn't have gone down like this. My hope has taken a hit. I've seen you do miracles. I've seen you heal people. Like this was your best friend. If you had been here, I know he'd be alive right now. I know it. But I still believe," Martha says, "that you could ask God whatever you want and it'll happen." Kind of saying, "You going to do something, Jesus?" And Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "he will rise when everyone rises at the last day." And Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die." Then he asks Martha, "Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." Then she returned to Mary. Sometimes our belief is just something we can say out loud, but it's hard to grasp it in our heart. Martha is like, "Yeah, I believe that you are the Son of God. I believe all this, but I can't reconcile what's happening in my life right now with who I know about you." Martha's like, "He's going to rise when everybody else rises." She didn't really get what he was saying. 7 times in the book of John, Jesus made these statements that are called I am statements, where he declared who he was. He gave us a little glimpse about who he is. I'm the bread of life. I am the gate. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the true vine. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And here in John 11, when he's talking to Martha, he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." Now, in the Jewish faith, many believed in eternal life. Many believed that when the Messiah came, that he would raise them from the dead and take them to heaven. But Jesus took her, and he looked at her in her eyes, and he's trying to convey to her. He tells her, "I'm not talking about the future. I'm talking about right here, right now. Your brother will live again. Your brother will rise again." And Martha's like, "Okay. He's like, I am the resurrection and the life, Martha. This was Jesus' plan all along. It was in verse 4, Jesus told his disciples, like, this sickness will not end in death. Like, he had a plan. Of course, his disciples didn't understand that. Like, what? It's not going to end in death? Fine. When we get there, you're going to heal him? Fine. Great. He's like, no, it's actually for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. In other words, man, we still go through some tragedies in life, even in the midst of God's plan. I don't know if you've been there. I've been there. Experienced some heartbreak, some brokenness. I'm like, God, what are you doing? Why? What is this part of the plan? I don't really get it. Trusting Jesus can be hard sometimes. Jesus says this sickness will not end in death, but he died. So we're like on the surface going, okay, what's happening? Jesus had a plan, but it wasn't perceived by those around him. Here's what I believe. When we follow Jesus, when we place our trust in him, we need to learn to trust his promises over our perceptions. It's hard when we can't see it, when we don't know what the plan is. But faith in Jesus, trust in him, true trust in him, is taking him at his word even when we can't see it. It's following this unseen into the unknown to experience the otherwise unbelievable. Jesus had a plan to raise Lazarus, but it didn't stop the heartbrokenness, the heartbreak that Mary and Martha and those around him felt. It didn't even stop his own heartbreak, and we're going to look at that in a second. Because up to this point, Jesus, it was clear that he was a healer. He had given sight to the blind. He had hearing to the deaf. He had caused lame people to walk again. Now was the opportunity to show what he could do, to show that even death and the grave did not have anything on him, that he had power over death and the grave. So he waited to go to Bethany. He waited. He put some time between Lazarus' death and his arrival on purpose. So when Jesus declared to Martha that her brother would live, he wasn't talking about eternity. He was talking about right then and in this life. And as followers of Jesus, the goal is not just about eternity. The goal is not just about the destination. That's part of it, but Jesus wants to give you true life, full life, right here, right now, today. He actually said it. He said it in John chapter 10. He said, I've come to give you life and life to the full. But it doesn't mean that the life-giving, the life that Jesus gives in the midst, it's not absent from hurt, pain, tragedy. We see as we continue on reading that Mary comes to him. In verse 30, it says, Jesus stayed outside the village at the place where Martha met him. When the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep. So they followed her there. And when Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said the same question, or the same statement that her sister had said. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. This time, Jesus didn't say to her, I'm the resurrection and the life, Mary. He saw her weeping, and he saw the other people wailing with her, and a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. And he asked, where have you put him? And they said, come and see. And then Jesus wept. And the people who were standing nearby said, see how much he loved him. But some said, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. There is something about this moment where we see the humanity of Jesus, unlike almost any other time. We see him kind of succumb to just this overwhelming feeling of heartbreak and loss for a friend. Mary was so heartbroken that she didn't even go out to meet him the first time. That's how upset she was at him. Like, I can't deal with that right now. I think one thing that we can take away from this today is that Jesus can handle your emotions. You can be upset and still come to him. He can handle those. You can be upset at him and still come to him. He can handle it. In fact, he's the only one that's going to be able to give you the resolution that's going to really help you get past that. And so I would invite you and encourage you today, like maybe you've been walking through life and you're like at a point where God has not done something according to your plan, or there's been a pain or been a tragic moment in your life, and you has turned your opinion on God to something different than it was in the past. I say, you know what? Take it to him. He can handle your emotions. He can handle it when you're upset. He can handle it when you're angry. Because he's all about giving you true life. The most loving thing that Jesus could do at that moment was to let Lazarus die. It doesn't seem like that would make any sense. But it didn't feel like love to Mary either. Her emotions are collided. Just hearing that Jesus was near kind of maybe resuscitated some hope in her soul, as the same hope that she had when she sent word to Jesus to begin with for him to come, but it was quickly smothered with grief and disappointment. Trusting Jesus can be hard sometimes, especially in moments of pain and hurt and tragedy, especially when our prayers for healing or for something to turn aren't answered in the way that we want them to. As followers of Jesus, we need to trust him more than what we experience and more than the fears that we feel. We can trust him more than our experiences and despite our emotions. We see Jesus' humanity. We see that even though Jesus knew that the death of Lazarus was going to happen, it was only temporary. He knew that. He was still filled with grief in this moment. He was heartbroken over the loss of his friend, and we see there in verse 35 that he wept. And the scripture here tells us that Jesus was deeply moved with grief mixed with anger. He was deeply troubled. And this is translated that it's kind of like this sorrow mixed with anger. He was heartbroken and angry at the same time. Not at Mary, not at Martha, not at anybody else who was there that day. He was angry for them, not angry at them. He was angry at the heartbreak. He was angry at the death that entered the world when sin did. He's angry that we have to go through this in the first place. Death was the object of Jesus' wrath, and behind death, him who has the power of death, and who has come into the world to destroy. Jesus came into the world to destroy this, and he's seeing it happen to his friend. So tears of sympathy may fill his eyes, but this is incidental. His soul is kind of held by rage, and he advances to the tomb as a champion who prepares for conflict. Jesus felt both compassion for their deep pain and grief and a righteous anger at death and brokenness in the world, and it moved him into action. And we see this, and if you've been in church before, you probably know where this is going, but we see that Jesus goes to the tomb. He's still angry when he arrives at the tomb. He says it's a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance, and in verse 39, he says, roll the stone aside. He tells them, Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible, which is probably true. I don't know if you've been around anything that's been dead for 4 days. Not great. Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside. Jesus looked up to heaven and said, and I love this prayer because this prayer kind of speaks not only, Jesus is speaking to God, but he's speaking to God so that everybody can hear, and it's been recorded so that all of us can see kind of who he is. His Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I say it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here so that they will believe that you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. And many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. We see this unbelievable event. They had seen him heal the blind. They had seen him give hearing to the deaf. They'd seen him have the lame walk again. They had never experienced this. The raising of Lazarus becomes not an isolated marvel, but a decisive instance, an open symbol of Jesus' conquest over death and the grave. He has not only saved us from the evils which oppress us, but he has felt for us in our oppression. He is with us, and he is for us. And he had promised Martha that he was the resurrection and the life. And he shows everyone on that day that he had the power and the authority over death and the grave. And yet, this was just the beginning. This was just part of what Jesus meant when he said, the I am, that great I am statement. There's so much more. This was just a precursor to the big event, because just a few days later, after the people had celebrated his arrival in Jerusalem and after the Last Supper, Jesus goes into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. He knows his arrest is imminent. He knows what's about to happen. And in John chapter 17, verse 1, he says that he looked up to heaven and he said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son so he can give glory back to you. He's saying, I know what's about to happen. But I told Martha, I'm the resurrection and the life. We raised Lazarus from the dead, but I know that's just a prelude to what's about to happen next. Jesus declared that the hour had come for the greatest work to be done. It was time to secure eternal life for all people. So the events of Holy Week move forward, and Jesus was arrested. He was tried, he was beaten, and he was sentenced to death. And it was time for Jesus to go to the cross and die for the sins of every person. Romans 5:8 reminds us that God demonstrates his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So around noon on Friday, the sky went dark, and it stayed dark for 3 hours. And Jesus said the words, "It is finished." The ground begins to shake. An incredible earthquake happens that tore the curtain from the temple, and Jesus died. Some of his followers came, and they took his body and down and placed him in a grave. It didn't happen to people who were crucified. They weren't buried. They were just kind of left there to decay. This is what was different about this whole experience, this whole event. It's fascinating that a couple followers, in fact, it was a rich man who tried to be secretive, and a Pharisee who met him in the middle of the night said, hey, we got to take him down. We got to place him in a grave. Everyone went home dejected. The disciples went into hiding. But all along, Jesus had a plan, because he is the resurrection and the life. And not only does he have the power to heal, not only does he have the power to raise people from the dead, he has the power to be raised from the dead himself. So on Sunday morning, when some of the women went to the tomb, they noticed the tomb was empty, and an angel of the Lord told them that he was not there, but he had risen. Why? Because he is the resurrection and the life. It's who he is. So that Easter Sunday, Mary Magdalene had a very, very similar experience as Mary and Martha. In John chapter 20, it says, early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb, found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance, and she ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, and the one whom Jesus loved, and they're like, they've taken the Lord's body. And then a little bit later on, Mary is standing outside of the tomb crying. She's crying. She's weeping. She's sad. She thinks that someone has stolen the body. She's still mourning the loss of Jesus. And as she wept, she stooped and looked in. And she saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. Dear woman, why are you crying? The angels asked her. Because they have taken away my Lord, she replied. I don't know where they've put him. She turned to leave. She saw someone standing there, and it was Jesus. But she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked you. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, just tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." And then Jesus says, "Mary." She turns to him and cries out, "Rabboni," which is Hebrew for teacher. She has this very similar experience where she experienced the loss of someone she loves. She's mourning, she's weeping, and she experiences the resurrection in the life of Jesus. Just as he spoke Lazarus' name and caused him to live again, he spoke Mary's name, and that moment changed everything for her. It's the same today. He's calling your name, and he wants to bring to life what is dead in our souls. Trusting Jesus can be hard sometimes. It may require following the unseen into the unknown. It may require believing Jesus over what we see or the fears that we feel. It may require that we trust in him or we believe in him over the experiences we have or the emotions that we have. It may require trusting and believing God's promises over our own perceptions. It may require finding rest in the faithfulness of God. God's plan may not be what we want, but it's always what is best. I love how Peter opens up his epistle. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 says, "Praise be to God. Be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead." New birth into a living hope. People who felt like their hope had taken a hit. Mary felt like her hope had taken a hit. Martha felt like her hope had taken a hit. Mary Magdalene felt like her hope had taken a hit. All the disciples felt like their hope had taken a hit. You may have felt like your hope has taken a hit, but through the resurrection of Jesus, we have been given new birth into a living hope. And into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. And this inheritance is kept in heaven for you. Why is it kept in heaven for you? Because we tend to spend things before we're ready to, before we need it. The prodigal son story is all about that. Like, give me my inheritance, I want to spend it. No, this inheritance is something that's for you. It's kept in heaven for you. It's not going to perish, spoil, or fade. In fact, it goes on to say this in verse 6. This is, you say, we rejoice. There's wonderful joy. You may have to endure trials a little bit longer temporarily. But he goes on and says this is because you actually believe in God because of Jesus. We know God is for us because Jesus died for us, not because all things always work out for us. Because of Jesus' crucifixion, our debt has been paid. Because of his resurrection, we have new life, and we can be assured that this life is not the end. And because of his victory, we can experience victory. And with all of that comes an incredible hope, an indescribable peace, and an infinite amount of joy. Why? Because he is the resurrection and the life. So what do? We declare that Jesus is Lord. We invite him into the depths of our heart and life. Romans chapter 10, verse 9 says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. We walk with him. We live for Jesus. We determine that we are going to grow in our relationship with God. We get rooted in a life-giving community of believers. We call that a church. Get connected. Come back. Be part of it. This is not something that we celebrate once a year, but it's something that God is continually living in us and that we can celebrate. In fact, next week we're starting a brand new series called Simplify. Life gets cluttered. It gets chaotic. There's a few things that God said, hey, focus on these things. It's a great place to start. Get plugged in. Get connected. But really, let his love motivate you to love him and love others. Let me pray for you this morning.